The evening was supposed to be perfect, the kind of night Denise Carter had been longing for after months of grueling deadlines, endless conference calls, and the suffocating pressure of living up to the expectations of her high-powered job at the marketing firm where she had recently been promoted to senior executive, and she had chosen this particular night for a simple but meaningful reason. It marked the 10th anniversary of her marriage to Marcus, the man who had been her anchor through every storm, a man whose love had steadied her during the darkest days, including those long lonely nights when he was deployed overseas serving his country, and she had booked a reservation at Le Chateau de Lumière, one of Chicago's most exclusive fine dining restaurants, a place whispered about in corporate circles, frequented by celebrities and politicians, and admired for its old world opulence with chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars, velvet drapes, and imported marble floors that made guests feel as though they had stepped into another century, a palace where only the deserving seemed welcome, and Denise, with her natural elegance, her smooth mahogany skin glowing under the city lights, her midnight blue silk dress hugging her in just the right way, her clutch held firmly in one hand, and her hair styled in neat twists that framed her face like a crown, walked toward the heavy glass doors with excitement bubbling inside her, eager to surprise Marcus, who was still parking their car, knowing how much he appreciated gestures like this after all they had endured together. But from the moment she stepped into the foyer she felt the shift in the air, the way eyes fell on her with that strange mixture of curiosity and silent judgment, the way the laughter at nearby tables dimmed for a beat before resuming, and she forced herself to hold her chin high, telling herself she belonged here as much as anyone else, that she had worked for this, earned this, and deserved this celebration. Yet as she approached the hostess stand, her heels clicking softly against the marble, the young blonde hostess with flawless makeup and a black pencil skirt looked her over with a smirk that Denise recognized all too well, the smirk of someone who had already decided she did not belong. And the hostess, with her saccharine voice laced with venom, said, "Good evening, do you have a reservation?" as though expecting the answer to be no, as though this was merely a formality before sending her away, but Denise, steady and polite, smiled and replied, "Yes, reservation for Carter, table for 2 at 7:30, before pulling out her phone to confirm the details, and the hostess, without even glancing at the screen, began tapping half-heartedly into the system, her eyes flicking over Denise's dress, her hair, her skin, before she leaned back and said with mock sympathy, "I'm sorry, but I don't see any reservation under that name. Perhaps you made it at another location?" Her words dripping with condescension, and Denise, fighting to keep her composure, pulled up the confirmation email, complete with the restaurant's logo and address, the date and time highlighted clearly, holding it out for the hostess to see, but instead of apologizing or correcting the error, the woman barely glanced at it before saying with a smug little shrug, "Well, sometimes the system makes mistakes. But unfortunately we're fully booked tonight, so there's really nothing I can do. Maybe try again another night," dismissing her like a stray cat at the back door, and Denise's stomach tightened, a flush of heat rushing to her face as she steadied her voice. "I have a confirmed reservation, I called earlier today to verify it, we're here for a special occasion, and I'd appreciate it if you could seat us." But the hostess's smirk only deepened as she glanced toward the dining room and then back at Denise, lowering her voice just enough to lace it with venom, "Ma'am, we have a dress code and standards here, and I'm afraid we have to enforce those. We can't just seat walk-ins who don't fit the ambience," her eyes raking over Denise's outfit as though it were somehow inappropriate despite its elegance, and the words hit Denise like a slap, coded language that she had encountered before, the implication clear enough. "You don't belong here, you're not our kind of guest," and though rage stirred in her chest, Denise's voice remained calm, clipped, and icy as she said, "Then perhaps I should speak to your manager," to which the hostess, clearly delighted by the scene she was orchestrating, rolled her eyes theatrically before disappearing through a side door, leaving Denise to stand in the middle of the foyer while diners and waiters alike stole glances at her, some with curiosity, others with open disdain, and a few, she noticed, with something like discomfort, as though ashamed of what they were witnessing but unwilling to intervene. And when the manager finally appeared, tall and thin with slicked back hair, a tailored suit, and the haughty air of someone convinced of his own superiority, he offered Denise a smile that was anything but warm. "Yes, ma'am, I understand you're having some trouble. How may I help you?" And Denise, taking a slow breath, repeated her situation, showing him the confirmation email, explaining she had booked in advance, but the manager's smile only tightened as he glanced at the screen before handing the phone back to her as though it were contaminated, saying smoothly, "I see, well, sometimes these systems accept reservations we cannot actually accommodate, and while I do apologize for the inconvenience, this is a fine dining establishment, and we have to maintain our standards and ambience for our regular clientele. I'm afraid we cannot seat you tonight," his tone dripping with polite cruelty, each word sharpened to cut, and Denise felt the sting of humiliation rising higher, the betrayal of a moment she had wanted to be special turning sour before her eyes, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking her, instead lifting her chin and demanding firmly, "Are you telling me that despite having a confirmed reservation, you're refusing to honor it because of how I look?" And the manager's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickering nervously to the guests who had gone quiet, but he quickly recovered, lowering his voice to say, "Ma'am, perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a different establishment, one that better suits your preferences," and the words, so coded yet so blatant, pierced her like knives, the cruelty wrapped in civility, and she stood there, her hands trembling inside her clutch, her chest burning with rage, humiliation threatening to spill over into tears, but she clenched her jaw and held her ground, because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that she wasn't standing alone tonight, and even as her heart pounded with anger, she heard the familiar, steady sound of footsteps behind her, the unmistakable presence that had always steadied her soul, and when she turned, her breath caught with relief and pride as Marcus Carter walked through the door, tall and broad-shouldered, his tailored black suit framing a body hardened by decades of military service, his chest adorned with subtle but unmistakable pins that reflected the life he had lived, his eyes sharp and commanding, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention, because his very presence shifted the atmosphere of any room he entered, and in that moment the hostess froze where she stood, her eyes widening, the smirk vanishing from her lips as though wiped away by an unseen hand, the manager's posture stiffening as his gaze darted between Marcus and Denise, because Marcus was not just any man, he was a retired Major General of the United States Army, a decorated leader whose name was known in both military and political circles, a man who had briefed presidents and sat across from foreign dignitaries, a man whose quiet authority carried weight beyond anything these gatekeepers of exclusivity could comprehend, and as he walked to his wife's side, slipping his arm around her shoulders with the tenderness of a man who cherished her above all else, he looked into her eyes and asked softly but firmly, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" And Denise, fighting back the tears of fury, explained how she had been dismissed, denied, humiliated, told she didn't belong, her voice trembling but strong, and as she spoke, the entire restaurant seemed to lean in, diners setting down forks, waiters freezing mid-step, the hum of conversation dying into silence, and Marcus's expression hardened, his jaw tightening, his dark eyes burning with a quiet fire as he turned to the manager and said in a voice that carried across the room, deep and resonant, "You humiliated my wife because you decided she wasn't good enough for this place, because of the color of her skin, because of your narrow idea of what belongs in your world. But let me tell you something, this woman has stood taller and braver than any of you will ever know. She has built businesses, mentored young people, funded scholarships for kids in this very city, and she has stood by me while I served this country. She has sacrificed and she has earned her place anywhere she chooses to be, far more than you could ever imagine," and his words struck like thunder, reverberating through the marble and crystal, silencing the last murmurs, and as he pulled out his phone, dialing quickly, speaking into the receiver with the calm authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed lives, the manager's face drained of color, sweat beading at his temple, because the person on the other end of that call was none other than Councilman Robert Larkin, a longtime friend of Marcus's and one of the city's most influential figures.